Coming to the next type of table, the complex table. Following is an example of a complex table by or multivariate table. They have more than one variable, as in this example, income and sex of the population studied are the variables. These tables have become more popular in the recent researches. Now, coming to how a table is to be prepared, following are certain guidelines on it. First guideline is the title of the table. Give a suitable headline to each table, which should be short and appropriate. Second, subheadings and captions. Give subheadings to different columns and rows. Captions are given to the various classifications made, like income, age, etc. Third guideline for preparing a table is the size of the column. Each column must have the correct size, which make them look more attractive. Next, arrangement of items in rows and columns. Items must be arranged in one order, for example, alphabetically, chronologically. Next, total. Columns must have different totals, each column having their own totals. Next, demarcation of columns. If columns have been divided further into subgroups, they should be in a suitable order and with subheadings. Then footnotes. If there is anything special about the table or figures which need to be brought to attention, the same should be mentioned in a footnote to the table. Data interpretation. After data has been processed and analyzed, interpretation of data is done. Now, there is a fine line of difference between data processing and data interpretation. Interpretation leads to what the given research findings really mean and what is the underlying generalization which is manifested through the data which is collected. Further interpretation may be descriptive, analytical or theoretical as the researcher deems fit. Hence, under data interpretation, the conclusions that the researcher has reached after the data has been processed and analyzed are further interpreted. Now, there are certain techniques of interpretation. The following are the same. First, researcher must be given reasonable explanation of the relation which he has founded, and the interpretation must be in the line of this relationship and the underlying process. They also must be uniform and coherent in interpretation. Second technique of interpretation is that extraneous information, if collected, must also be considered for the final interpretation. They may have a key factor in them. Third, consult an expert in the field before embarking the final interpretation. The expert might give an insight into the research result, which will further help the researcher. And finally, all relevant factors must be considered before finishing the final interpretation. The researcher must not be in a haste. He might come to an inaccurate result because of such a haste. Now, what are the types of data analysis? Data analysis can be divided into two types. There is a descriptive data analysis and inferential analysis. Descriptive analysis has been defined by C. Moray as largely the study of distribution of one variable. This study provides us with profiles of companies, work groups, persons and other subjects on any multiple characteristics such as size, composition, efficiency, preference, etc. Now, an illustration of a descriptive analysis is that, let's say, the researcher is collecting data from various law colleges in India to map the job preferences of students in the final year of LLB. In such a research, job preferences like litigation, corporate, further studies, judiciary, etc. become the variables. Tools which are used under descriptive analysis are percentage and mean method. The data under descriptive analysis are then further represented in a graph. Now coming to inferential analysis. For testing hypotheses, in order to determine with what validity data can be set to indicate some conclusion or conclusions, inferential analysis is used. Now an illustration of this can be that the researcher is studying the access to justice system in India, and his hypothesis being that the Indian justice delivery system favors the haves and marginalizes the have-nots. The data collected is from various stages in the delivery system like police, station, courts of justice, litigants, etc. Once the data is collected, processed, then the researcher does the inferential analysis to test the validity of the hypothesis. What are the general characteristics of analysis of data? First, the researcher should keep in mind that analysis will vary depending upon the nature of the study. That is, whether the study undertaken is a qualitative study, a quantitative study, or a mixed combination of the both. Second characteristic that the researcher must keep in mind regarding analysis of data is that researcher should possess thorough knowledge of the area of research and data collected. Third characteristic is that the data to be analyzed and interpreted should be producible, be readily disposed to quantitative treatment, and have significance for some systematic theory and can serve as broad generalization. Fourth general characteristic that should be kept in mind regarding analysis of data is that researcher must keep a clear set of hypotheses formulated at the very start of the research, which will lead to clearer actions and better data collection as well as analysis. Fifth characteristic is that in case the data collected is from vague clues rather than according to the specific hypothesis, in such cases the data are analyzed inductively or investigated during the process and not by means of any prescribed set of rules. Sixth, for a successful study, the researcher must keep in mind the task of analysis and interpretation should be designed before the data is actually collected. Data analysis also includes statistical analysis. Statistics is an important tool for a researcher. The science of collection, presenting, and analysis and interpretation of numerical data is termed to be statistics. Statistics is useful in all fields of research and study, including law. In a research with a large data, statistics helps in reducing such data into a more manageable size for the purpose of analysis and further interpretation. Now coming to an illustration where statistics can be of use to a law researcher. The researcher, let's say, is doing an impact analysis of the National Food Security Act of 2013 in the National Capital Territory. The universe of the researcher in such a case is Delhi, and the population is all the segments of people who are eligible for the food under the said act. The tools of data collection chosen by the researcher, let's say, is the survey method. Once the data is collected, the size of the data would be big. Here, the statistical tool would be of great assistance to the researcher to achieve his research objective.